In this lecture, we're going to talk about some ethical issues that relate to design. And in particular, I'm going to focus on the importance of autonomy and why that's particularly important to designers. I will explain a little bit what autonomy is, why it's important, and also try and explain to you why this is, for me, one of the most important issues in design ethics. And also, particularly for this project, it's an important issue for you. I'm going to start, however, by just doing a quick review of some potential issues around design ethics. If we take a look back at our web of values, norms, and virtues, we can use this to home in on certain values that may lead to ethical issues in design. So, for example, if I was to take two values such as respect and privacy, we can see that we might, if we were designing an interactive media social network, for example, have to deal with the conflict between these two things. If we take privacy first off, we expect privacy because we want to be able to grow, we want to be able to try things out, we want to take risks without having the problem that those risks will come back to haunt us. However, this can clash with the idea of respect. Another value we have is that maybe that when we're on a social network, we don't want to be trolled, we don't want to be insulted, we don't want to have our views shouted at. However, in order to do this, we may have to compromise the privacy of other users. The fact that people act in odd ways on social networks is often to do with the fact that they feel that they're invisible, or at least they're anonymous. That anonymity means that they behave in ways that they would not normally do when in the real world, because in the real world people would recognize them. So the question is, if we want to create a respectful environment on our social network, how far do we need to go to limit the privacy of people? This is a particularly big issue, certainly on Twitter over the recent months. This has become a big issue. As a designer, you may have to decide on this sort of ethical conflict. Another example of an ethical conflict may be, for example, privacy versus safety. I already mentioned this in an earlier college. But what, for example, would you do to ensure the privacy of people versus the safety of other people, for example, against terrorism or against people who would want to harm children? How far is privacy over safety an important issue, or how far is privacy more important than safety? Again, this is a sort of question that you might have to decide for yourself as a designer, and this is an ethical issue. So these seem to be some examples of ethical issues that may come up as a designer of interactive media products. These aren't the only ones, of course. There are plenty of other issues that are quite common at the moment, and other issues that I'm sure you can think of yourself. However, for the rest of this lecture, I'd like to focus in on the issue of autonomy. I think this is particularly important, firstly, for the project you're working on now, but also partly it's an important issue for designers anytime because of the nature of design work. The idea behind this is essentially, as a designer, you're trying to design two types of behaviour. The first type of behaviour you're trying to design is the design behaviour of the artefact you're working on. So, for example, on the left, there's a flowchart which is a mock-up of a login screen for a game. In principle, what you're doing here is you're trying to work out what happens in each step of the process to take the user from logging in to actually starting to play. And you're trying to design the different steps, you're trying to design what happens if there's an error. Essentially what you're doing is you're designing the behaviour of the artefact. However, there's another type of behaviour you do as a designer, and this is, for example, what we're trying to expect you to do for this project. Essentially, you try to design the behaviour of the user. You try to ensure that they do the right thing within your game, or within your product, within your artefact, and partly you're also trying to ensure they do the right thing often, they do the right thing with their life. So you're trying to design their behaviour not just in relation to the product or artefact you're designing, but sometimes that product or artefact can actually have an influence on how they interact with the world, what they do in the world. And this, for me, seems to be important because as a designer, that means that we are making choices or trying to influence the choices of our users and other stakeholders. Basically, what we're trying to do is we design behaviour, and by doing so, we affect the autonomy, I think the Dutch word is self-bestuur, of other people. So, as I said in the previous lecture, we're doing ethics for our users. We're actually trying to push people to do certain things in certain ways. So, designers design behaviour, and as a result, they affect the autonomy of other people. Why is this important? Why is autonomy so important? And why should we, as designers, be very careful when we start to affect autonomy? Well, there seems to be a number of reasons for this. The first one involves the fact that autonomy itself and the level of autonomy that human beings have means that we should give them dignity and moral respect. The idea here is that we can choose to do things that perhaps other animals can't. As human beings, or what philosophers call persons, we are able to make choices that go outside our nature. For example, I'm a vegetarian, and I've chosen to be a vegetarian even though naturally I am an omnivore. I can eat fish, meat and vegetables and fruit. I've chosen to not eat fish or meat because I've decided I don't want to. That's a level of autonomy that I have that perhaps another animal such as a cat or a dog can't have. These sorts of animals are not so self-aware, so they're not able to make that high level of choice, so they don't have the same level of autonomy. Of course they can make choices, but they can't make choices fundamentally outside their normal nature. As a result, we don't have to give cats or other types of animals the same level of dignity or moral respect. We can choose to do that because we're autonomous, but we don't have to. In terms of human beings or persons, we do have to. The second reason autonomy is important is that it actually is the basis of the reason we have to tell the truth. The idea is that if we are autonomous, then we need information that's correct in order to make choices. So in order to make choices, we need to be told the truth, because if we're not told the truth, we may make bad choices. So autonomy is not just the basis of respect, it's also the basis of telling the truth. The third reason is a little bit more complex, relating to philosophy, and this is the idea that autonomy is the basis of Kant's ethics, and we're going to come to Kant's ethics in another lecture. But the idea behind it is we have a duty to behave morally to people because of our autonomy and our rationality, but I'll come back to that another time. The fourth reason is that autonomy is normally seen as an essential part of being happy or having what's called human well-being. The idea is that we need autonomy in order to be fulfilled and to live our own lives as we choose. This is a fundamental component of human well-being, and therefore autonomy is important. As soon as we start restricting autonomy, we run the risk of affecting the well-being of other people. The fifth reason is autonomy is actually seen as an important virtue in itself. The idea is that we actually respect and want people to make choices. That's an important part of what it is to be human, but it's also an important part of what it is to be a human in society. For example, if you were not able to make choices, you probably wouldn't be a very good employee. Most companies, most bosses are looking for people who can make choices and not have to ask every 5 seconds what they need to do. The sixth reason, and this is an important issue in ethics, is the idea that autonomy itself is necessary for moral responsibility. The idea here is that in order to be held responsible, you have to have been made a choice. If you didn't choose to do something, then you can't be held responsible in a moral sense. An example here might be useful. For example, if I was to hold a gun to your head and tell you to give 10 euros to a friend of yours, could you be praised for your action? Probably not. No one would say that you really chose to give 10 euros to a friend. This was a forced choice, therefore it's very hard to hold you morally responsible for it. You actually did it, of course, but it would be hard to say that you did something good for your friend. You probably did something good for yourself, and quite sensibly, but you didn't do anything that could be considered ethically valuable to your friend. The final reason we see autonomy as important is actually a combination of all the above reasons. Essentially, autonomy is an important part of our moral system. In order to demand, for example, that people tell the truth, that they respect other people, we need to respect autonomy. So as a result, the moment we start playing with autonomy, we start to affect how far we can expect ethical behaviour from people.